Welcome, everybody. My name is Carolyn Dubé. I'm the Executive Director at Fertility Matters Canada, and I'm thrilled today to be with you live with Sara Cohen. She's a fertility lawyer in Toronto, and she's also president of the board of directors with Fertility Matters Canada. She's a long-standing member of our organization and an incredible advocate for fertility patients internationally. So, Sara, I'm going to get you to tell us a little bit about yourself, and then Sara's going to talk to us about the changes. There's been a lot of changes in the past couple of years to the Assisted Human Reproduction Act, and Sara's here to sort of lay that all out for us so that we have a really clear understanding of what those of you looking to get access to donor egg, donor sperm, donor embryo. So Sara, I'll let you take it away.
Thanks so much, Carolyn. So yes, today I'm going to talk to you about these new regulations that we have under Section 12 of the Assisted Human Reproduction Act. They're called, a mouthful, the Reimbursement Related to Assisted Human Reproduction Regulations. So I just refer to them as a Section 12 regulations. And the funny part is we've had Section 12 of the Act since the Assisted Human Reproduction Act came into effect back in 2004. And it always said you can't reimburse a surrogate or you can't reimburse an egg, a sperm, or an embryo donor except in accordance with the regulations. But we never had any regulations. So Section 12 was really not live, for lack of a better term. It was not in effect up until really just a couple weeks ago. So a couple weeks ago, Section 12 came into effect, into force, and we do have regulations now. And those are what I'm going to talk to you today about. So Carolyn gave me a nice introduction. I'm not going to tell you too much about myself. The best way to reach me, I'll put up my email address at the end if you have any other questions. I'm a big law nerd, a huger fertility law nerd, so I'm really always happy to chat if you do have questions. I love talking about these things, so don't be shy. Feel free to ask me questions if you'd like. When I'm making this presentation today to you, there's 3 take-homes that I want you to have with you. The first is that even though it's going to sound like these regulations are really scary, and we've made kind of a bit of production about them and their mere existence, they're actually not that complicated. So I don't want you to get frightened off of doing egg or sperm or embryo donation in Canada or surrogacy in Canada. This is very, very doable. If you are working with a consultancy, I'm sure they already have this down pat. If they don't, they're welcome to contact me and I'm happy to walk them through it. And really for those of you who are doing things independently, that's kind of who I'm going to be speaking to today. So the people who have found a donor on their own or found a surrogate on their own and are managing the funds for reimbursements between them and the surrogate or then of the donor themselves, you are the people who I'm really addressing today. The other thing I want to let you know is that even though these regulations are brand new, the actual effect of how we reimburse a surrogate or how we reimburse a donor in Canada is really not that different than it was a couple of weeks ago. There are not major changes to what this is going to look like. We basically continue, for the most part, and we'll talk about the differences, but for the most part, what we reimbursed a surrogate before, we're still reimbursing them today. What we reimbursed a donor before, for the most part, we're still reimbursing today, with a little bit of changes. The major difference is there's a lot more paperwork. So yes, this is going to be a little bit more annoying. Yes, this is going to be more time consuming, but it is doable. The final thing I want to say is as much as I'm telling you this is still doable and it is doable and it's possible, I don't want us to forget that there are necessary changes we need to make in the law. So just because we do have a framework that tells us how to do it doesn't mean the law in itself is fine. And I actually think as we talk about this today, and I show you some of the comments that Health Canada made in their guidance document that kind of interfere almost or kind of butt heads with the regulations themselves, I think it goes to the heart of the fact that we need to change the law itself. And we're going to talk about that too. So today when I'm speaking with you, I'm going to talk to you about 3 different documents. The first is the Assisted Human Reproduction Act, and in that we're talking about Section 12 of the Assisted Human Reproduction Act, and that's the act that deals with surrogacy, egg donation, sperm donation, and embryo donation right across the country, so it doesn't matter what province you're in, it's applicable to you. The second one we're going to talk about are the Section 12 regulations, and the last thing we're going to talk about, you just heard me mention, which is something called Health Canada's guidance document. Important to note, a guidance document is not law, but it's Health Canada's interpretation of the law. So it's saying, we know we've given you a bunch of law that might be a little confusing. Let us try to explain to you how we would interpret it. But it's not going to be Health Canada that's going to have the opportunity to interpret the law. It's going to be a judge. So it's still, you've got to, take it with a grain of salt, but obviously it's really, really helpful. So even before we look at those 3 documents, I want you to remember that paying a surrogate in Canada is illegal. Paying a donor, whether it's an egg donor, sperm donor, embryo donor in Canada is illegal. And purchasing or selling embryos in Canada is illegal. And all those are punishable by up to 10 years in jail and or $500,000. I always like repeating that to people because I'm still in shock, a decade after doing this work, that paying someone $100 for their sperm put you in jail for up to 10 years. That being said, I like people to take this again with a grain of salt and remember that no parents have ever been charged. So it doesn't mean that you should do anything illegal. Obviously, I'm a lawyer. I want you to do everything exactly by the book. I want you to do things legally. But I also don't want you to be so scared off by the law that you think it's impossible to navigate it, because it's not the case. So although you can't pay a surrogate or pay a donor in Canada, it is perfectly legal to reimburse a donor or surrogate for expenses incurred as a result of the pregnancy or donation, as long as you do it now in accordance with the regulations. So Health Canada sets out for us in their guidance document, they say, although there is no obligation to reimburse, i.e. unless you have an agreement between you and the surrogate or you and the donor, you don't actually have it, there's no law that says you must reimburse the person. Health Canada recognized that sperm and ova donors and surrogate mothers should not be out of pocket for expenditures as a result of donation or surrogacy. So like one Toronto REI, who's really well known in the area, likes to say a lot, although it is altruistic, it's not free. So we still don't want the person who is a surrogate or an egg donor, an embryo donor, sperm donor to actually have to lose money themselves by going through this process. So we're trying, the overall goal is to make them equal. And how are we going to try to do that? So Section 12 of the Assisted Human Reproduction Act is the part that is now in force of the act that wasn't in force before. And it says that you can't reimburse a donor unless you do it in accordance with the regulations. You can't reimburse someone in the maintenance or transport of an in vitro embryo, and you can't reimburse a surrogate mother unless you do so in accordance with the regulations. You also, it says that you need a receipt for all of those expenditures. And finally, it makes a special case almost for a loss of work-related income incurred by a surrogate during a pregnancy. Notice it doesn't talk about that after a pregnancy. So a surrogate gives birth, what happens after pregnancy. And it doesn't talk about an ova donor, for example, loss of work-related income in the process of donating her ova. And we'll see a little bit later how that ends up being a problem. But these 3 pieces of the act, the regulations are about. So what do the regulations say? And they say different things for reimbursing a donor, different things for reimbursing a surrogate, and different things for the maintenance and transport of an embryo. So sperm donor and egg donor are lumped together, and they always are in the Assisted Human Reproduction Act. And I think that's important, and the reason they must be is probably just because equality and equity reasons, which makes sense, even though we know it's extremely different process to get sperm for a donation than it is to get eggs. Different risk, different time, different suffering, different pain and suffering, etc. So for both the sperm donor and egg donor, though, you can reimburse for travel expenditures, including for transportation, parking, meals, and accommodation. You can reimburse the care of dependents or pets. So a dependent isn't just a child. It could be, for example, if someone has an elderly parent who lives with them, so that could be a dependent as well. Counseling services. So when I read counseling services, I think about psychosocial counseling, and that, of course, is included there, but there's also genetic counseling, which is included as well. Legal services and disbursements, so any legal work that has to be done as a result of the sperm or egg donation. For obtaining any drug or device as defined in Section 2 of the Food and Drug Act. So that could be over-the-counter or not over-the-counter medication, so all different kinds of medication. It could be different, it's not exactly relevant here in this situation, but it could be, for example, like lactation or pumping or other items that have to do with our reproductive cycles, etc. It could be birth control pills, lots of different things like that fall into that category. Now, this is a really broad one for obtaining products or services that are provided or recommended in writing by a person authorized under the laws of a province to practice medicine in that province. So by the way, it doesn't just say a doctor. So it could be a midwife, for example, or actually in this situation, I'm sorry, I'm mistaken. That's going to talk about that surrogacy. Here we are talking about someone practicing medicine, so it's a doctor. It doesn't have to necessarily be your fertility doctor. It could be your GP, especially people do sperm donation. We do at-home insemination quite a bit in Ontario, for example. So it could be your GP, but it has to be a doctor. And what they are allowed to recommend in writing is very broad. It could be, for example, someone wants to get acupuncture because some people believe that acupuncture has some positive results when it comes to cycling for egg retrieval. It could be chiropractic services. It could be lots of different things like that. It could be really like it's completely endless what it could be, but it's whatever a doctor recommends in writing. So you need that in writing though. Any cost involved in obtaining that written recommendation, any insurance. And we're really lucky here in Canada. If people are a resident of a province, they're generally covered by their local province's healthcare regime. For people who aren't residents of provinces, then they're less lucky and might actually need to get some health insurance coverage. And it's possible that people want to buy disability insurance for a donor. It's possible you want to buy life insurance coverage for a donor. I don't really see that very frequently happening. Travel insurance, why not? People travel across this country. We do intra-provincial donation very, very frequently. And then obtaining or confirming medical or other records. So if you have to go between your doctors, for example, and your doctor requires a certain fee in getting your records, that's fine. You can be paid for that. You can be reimbursed for that. But kind of what I hinted at before, what's really missing here is net lost wages of a donor. That's not listed here as something that's reimbursable to a donor. The good news is that Health Canada made a statement in their guidance document. And Health Canada's statement is, it's got two here, says that Health Canada is of the view that reimbursements made in respect of matters not set out in Section 12 of the Assisted Human Reproduction Act are not automatically prohibited, i.e. they're not automatically a breach of Section 6 and Section 7 of the Assisted Human Reproduction Act. Certain reimbursements may be reasonably justified, such as reimbursing an overdonor for the loss of work-related income. And then again, Health Canada later in that same document goes on to say that if a person reimburses an overdonor for the loss of work-related income, a certification from a qualified medical practitioner provided to the reimburser prior to their issuing a reimbursement is necessary. And that's really important. So if you do have an overdonor, I can think of lots of situations where you're going to have an overdonor who's going to be out of pocket from net lost wages as a result of participating in over retrieval. I can be doing a completely altruistic egg donation. I can have a sister who lives in Thunder Bay. I'm flying down here to my clinic in Toronto. And she's going to, if we want her not in and out on the same day, and obviously we don't, and it's really not possible when we're doing egg retrieval, we're going to actually want her here, want her to be monitored by the clinic. They want to check her after, ideally. We don't want to shove her back on a plane without any medical care right away after. So she could potentially miss like a chunk of work there that she should be entitled to be reimbursed for. It says here, though, that Health Canada's position is you need to get a doctor writing that she needs to miss work in order to protect her health. One of the problems with this, though, is it's not listed in Section 12. And Health Canada says that in its opinion, this is perfectly legitimate, and that's great, and that's really, really helpful. But what I think this really shows us is Health Canada couldn't write this in. They couldn't put in net lost wages for an overdonor because it wasn't written into the original act, the same way net lost wages for a surrogate were originally written into the original act. And this is just another way of showing that there's problems with the original act that actually have to be fixed. Those cannot be fixed by Health Canada. Those have to be fixed by the government. So this is one really important example of the way that we have learned so much over the years about assisted reproductive technologies and especially about third-party reproduction. And we know now that the act that we prepared back in 2004, which was actually based on research from the late 80s, early 90s, doesn't reflect what we think is fair anymore, doesn't reflect necessarily the Canadian perspective. And even if, and I'm not necessarily completely pro the concept that we should only be altruistic in Canada, I'm actually not pro that perspective. I think we should be allowed for compensated egg donation and surrogacy, sperm donation in Canada. But even if we had altruistic, there's still problems with the act that we have to go back to the original act to fix. So Section 12 reimbursement regulations also have a long list, a much longer list of reimbursements that are available to a surrogate mother. And these again include a lot of the ones that were already talked about. So travel expenditures, care of dependents or pets, counseling, legal, all those things are the same. One difference is that a surrogate can get notes or written recommendations for services or products from a midwife, for example, if you're in a province where a midwife is licensed to practice. You can pay or you can reimburse a surrogate for the cost of a midwife or doula. There are some here that are really difficult. And one of the most difficult one is groceries. Because we understand, we just know that pregnant women eat more than do non-pregnant women. And we actually know, if you look at research, it says at different phases of a pregnancy, a pregnant person needs to eat something like 350 more calories per day. And later in the pregnancy, she needs to eat something like 450 more calories per day. And obviously this can add up. But in addition to that, you might have intended parents, for example, who are halal, and they want their surrogate to only eat halal food. Or you might have, I've worked with intended parents who are only organic, they eat very clean. They want the surrogate eating only organic, very clean. Obviously, there's a cost involved here. So you can reimburse a surrogate for food groceries, although not other groceries, but food groceries. The problem is it's very difficult to calculate that. So you've got to think about it, because you can't just cover all her groceries. She was obviously going to eat anyways. You can cover maternity clothes. Telecommunications is kind of like the groceries in the sense that if someone already had a cell phone, you can't pay for their cell phone. If someone already had a complete, long distance plan, you can't cover their long distance plan. But it's any difference that they had from before to now, basically as a result of acting as a surrogate, that you were allowed to cover that difference. You're allowed to cover prenatal exercise classes, again, life insurance, disability insurance, health insurance. And again, what I want to talk about here is that with respect to a surrogate, her expenses for net lost wages are dealt with under Section 12 sub 3. So they're dealt with under separate part of the law. But it doesn't mention anything about pre or postpartum wage loss. So we have to, again, go to Health Canada's guidelines for that. So Health Canada says that it is of the view that surrogate mothers may be reimbursed for the loss of work-related income during the pre-pregnancy and postpartum periods, provided they obtain the written certification from the qualified medical practitioner, and provided the reimbursement is made in accordance with the regulations. Again, the problem with that is the regulations don't actually say that. So the regulations don't list pre and post net lost wages. They only talk about net lost wages during the pregnancy. And of course, that makes no sense. We don't want a surrogate having to go back to work the day after she gives birth. That makes no sense. It's just not protecting the health and well-being of the surrogate, which is really the entire impetus for the legislation that we have. And of course, there's going to be missed work in preparing to be a surrogate. It's extremely time intensive. You're going to a clinic back and forth, often not in your hometown, in preparing for an embryo transfer and in the original screening. So we want to make sure that a surrogate is able to be reimbursed for these things. And Health Canada says you can, that's great. I again point to the fact that we have a gap in our legislation that needs to be fixed, and that has to be done by the government. That can't be done by Health Canada. One of the weirder things that we have in this legislation that doesn't get a lot of talk about is the only part when it comes to donating with respect to it, reimbursing with respect to an embryo, is the maintenance and transport of an embryo. Okay, so it says you can reimburse someone for the expenditures for the maintenance of an in vitro embryo, including storage, and you can reimburse someone for expenditures for the transport of an in vitro embryo, including preparing it for transport, for the shipping container, and for preparing the container for the transport. But the problem is it doesn't actually talk about any other expenses that have to do with embryo donation. Actually, if you look at this, a lot of this has nothing to do with embryo donation. It could even just be shipping an embryo between clinics. So this is actually relevant for the clinics too. And I hope some clinics are aware of this, that they need to follow actually these Section 12 reimbursements and these guidelines when shipping embryos between clinics or otherwise, because this is actually speaking to them too. What it doesn't speak to is about embryo donation. So it does say, again, in the Health Canada's guidance document, that another example of a legitimate expense is that in Health Canada's opinion, it is not a breach of Section 6 or 7 of the Assisted Human Reproduction Act to reimburse an in vitro embryo donor for expenditures such as those incurred for counseling and legal services. But again, it's a problem because those aren't actually listed in the Section 12 regulations, and they're not listed in the Section 12 regulations because there's a gap in the original legislation that needs to be fixed by the actual government. So up until now, I think all this is doable, and I think you probably understand what you're allowed to reimburse, and if it's not listed here, it's not mentioned by Health Canada, I would be wary of reimbursing it. I really want you to follow what, talk to your lawyer, of course. Don't just go off on the webinar. It's important you talk to your lawyer. You might have a really good reason for reimbursing something that is actually truly altruistic and truly out of pocket. Your lawyer might want to run that by Health Canada. They might not want to run that by Health Canada. That's a decision between you and your lawyer. But in addition to this, one of the hard parts about these new regulations is that there's a lot more documentation that you are going to have to be involved with before you make that reimbursement. So you've always needed receipts, in my opinion. We've always needed receipts, and we'll talk about those receipts in a moment. But on top of needing receipts now, you need more. Before you are able to reimburse a donor or a surrogate, you must have a declaration from them that is dated and signed by the person that sets out the reimbursement, that it sets out their name and address, the nature of each expenditure, the amount incurred, the amount requested, the date each expenditure was incurred. It has to have, in terms of travel using your own car, obviously there's not going to be a receipt, so you have to put the kilometers traveled and the addresses, so someone else could calculate the distance if necessary. A statement basically indicating that each expenditure was incurred in the course of donating sperm or ova or in relation to a surrogacy, a statement that it has not been paid to them by any other source, so you can't double dip basically, a statement that everything here is in the declaration is accurate and complete to the best of their knowledge. If there's a service or a product that is being reimbursed to a surrogate or a donor, you have to have a copy of that written recommendation. It just basically goes on with a list of requirements. You need to have all of those. A person who reimburses an expenditure set out in the declaration must indicate on the declaration the amount of each expenditure that they reimbursed and the date of reimbursement, and they must sign it to affirm that information. So this sounds really complicated. Health Canada does provide a sample. You don't have to use their sample document. I provided the link up here, which is obviously going to be a little bit difficult for you to just copy down right now. If you need me to send it to you, it's my pleasure to send this to you. If you just want to do it yourself and Google it up, you can Google Section 12 reimbursement regulations, Health Canada guidance document, and then you're going to be able to look through for sample documents from Health Canada, and they have these provided for you. They're not all that user-friendly. There's not a lot of space. You'll find you may end up wanting to create your own, but at least you can follow what's going there. And the same thing happens for loss of work-related income. And remember that this talks in the legislation only about reimbursing a surrogate for loss of income incurred during a pregnancy, but according to the actual Health Canada documents, we can talk about prenatal and we can talk about postnatal loss of work-related income. So you're still going to want to get doctor recommendations for that, and you're also going to want to do that for an ova donor, that if she has to miss work in the course of donating ova, you can reimburse her as long as you have that document from the doctor that says, and this is the important part, it's not just that, yes, she missed work, but it's that she had to miss work in order to protect her health or the health of the fetus. So you actually need this requirement. So the idea always was behind this that being a surrogate, being a donor is not, you're not paying someone for work. It's just you are only allowed to reimburse them for net lost wages if actually they had to miss work to protect their health or the health of the fetus or the embryo. Again, Health Canada provides a sample document. Again, I'm happy to send that to you, or you can look that up yourself. And again, you're going to have to sign and affirm the amount of loss of income that you reimburse, the date of the reimbursement, and you must sign to affirm that you've done so. Luckily, Health Canada, I think, took a very reasonable position, or it tried to, I think, take a very reasonable position when drafting these regulations, and it tried to be as reasonable as possible. It was a little bit stuck with the legislation that it already had, but within what it had, I think it tried to be as understanding and reasonable and comprehensive as possible. So when it comes to a requirement for receipt, because you do need receipts for every single thing that you reimburse a surrogate or donor, it takes a really broad view. And one example it gives is they understand that if you're having a babysitter, for example, they don't have proper receipts. They're not able to do that, but they could write on a piece of paper. You know, I worked for $15 an hour Monday night from, 4 p.m. till 8 p.m. And this is how much, and date and sign, and all the other requirements that are listed under the regulations. So it doesn't always have to be a proper receipt. And there is an exemption when people drive by car, and that the maximum you are allowed to reimburse someone when they use their own car is the CRA rate, and that changes every year. So just look it up online at any given year. Whoops, I just pressed the wrong button. And another thing that's a little bit difficult is the obligation is on the person who's doing the reimbursing. So the actual potential criminal penalty for paying someone or for not reimbursing in accordance with the regulations is on the person who's doing that reimbursing, often on the parents, sometimes on someone who's doing the reimbursing for them. And it is on them to make sure you have a record of all documents that were obtained in the course of this process, so that you got, so the receipts that you got, the declarations that you got, the affirmations that you made, all those things, you have to keep them for at least 6 years after the date of that final reimbursement. So you need to keep on those, and it's not anyone's responsibility but your own, so you need to make sure you have those. And finally, I just want to make myself available for questions if you have. I recognize this is just a lot of information, and just a lot of detail, and it might be a lot easier when you're actually practicing it. But if you do have questions, I'm always happy to answer. And I don't know, Carolyn, if you received any questions from our viewers.
Great. Sara, thank you so much. That was so thorough, and I learned quite a bit today. So I appreciate obviously your knowledge and your ability to explain in more layman's terms, take something from legal wording to something that the majority of us can wrap our heads around. So thank you for that.
My pleasure.
For those of you who are watching on Zoom and on our Facebook Live, if you've got questions you'd like Sara to answer, please feel free to add it to the chat or comment section of the platform you're on. Sara, I have a question. I'm curious to know, so we've got all of these laws now in place, or regulations in place. I'm curious if you are sort of just starting your journey and you're looking for either a donor of egg, sperm, or embryo, or you're looking for a surrogate. Where would you start? Like, what's the first thing an individual or a couple or a partner should be doing to kind of start that process?
That's a great and a very broad question, and I think the answer is a little bit different depending on what you're looking for. So if you're looking for a donor embryo, you've got a few different options. There's one organization that I'm a big fan of in Canada called Beginnings Family Services. They just did a talk with Fertility Matters Canada, so if someone's interested in embryo donation, I recommend that you watch that talk that you did with them earlier. I think they bring a very child-centered focus to embryo donation, and they're great. Some people are very successful about finding embryo donors online. So I don't like people to think that's impossible. It really is possible. And I'm not personally scared of that. If you take all the proper steps, you get your legal agreements in place, you do your psychological assessments properly by people who are educated and experienced in the area, and you're working with clinics who do this, for me, that's not necessarily a no. It's just don't, skip steps. And then there's some clinics that actually have embryo donor programs. Those ones tend to be anonymous though, and they don't tend to give you the opportunity to have a relationship of any sort, or information exchange going forward with the donors. So that's a limiting factor, and they're also very long wait list on those generally. If I was looking for a sperm donor, again, I'm going to think about, am I looking for a known sperm donor or an anonymous sperm donor? A known doesn't necessarily, when it comes to sperm donor, it's going to be someone that you know. It doesn't have to be someone close to you, but someone who you know this person, and you're going to end up doing an agreement with them and having their sperm donated to you. If you're more comfortable with an anonymous sperm donor or something called open ID sperm donor, which is something that by contract, once the child reaches the age of majority, if they want to find out the ID of the donor, they can do so. You're going to do that through a sperm bank. We have one national sperm bank in Canada, Reimbursement. Otherwise, we import a lot of our sperm. We import something like 95% of our sperm actually from the United States. And then to find an egg donor is, again, you're going to decide if you want a known donor, someone you know in your life, or there are actually agencies that can help you find a known donor. So that's something that's really intriguing for me, and I find for a lot of my clients that they might not know someone in their life, but they might have an interest in knowing who the donor is, having contact going to the future. So a lot of the agencies will work with you and help you on that journey if that's what you decide is best for your family. You can also have an anonymous egg donor. And then you're making a choice between A, someone you already know in your life to be a donor. B, and by the way, the donor must be in all cases at least 19, so older, 18 or older. So someone you know in your life, someone you meet through an agency, whether you meet them or don't meet them and it's anonymous, or you could use an egg bank. Those egg banks, again, are American egg banks. We're importing those eggs from the United States. Those are going to be anonymous or open ID. Finding a surrogate is a little bit harder to discuss because there's prohibitions on, you can't basically just pay someone to match you with a surrogate. And that's really dumbing down the terminology. The actual legislation says you can't pay someone to arrange for the services of a surrogate mother or accept consideration for arranging services of the surrogate mother. So you can use someone you know, or you should speak to a lawyer before you work with any agency or consultancy, because there's actually, you need to do a legal analysis on whether a payment to that consultancy has legal risk to it or not. There are some that are really excellent in the country, so that I'm quite comfortable with, and there are some that maybe don't take the same precautions that we'd rather them take. But there's a lot of surrogacy happening in Canada. It's very doable. Lots of gamete donation, also very, very doable. Embryo donation, I see more and more of every year, and for me, known embryo donation is, where my heart is at in terms of embryo donation, and it makes me so happy how much people have become open to that.
So special. Thank you for clarifying those things, Sarah, because I do know that they are, all of those options are quite different from each other. So thank you for clarifying. We have one question that's come in. They're just wondering if the slides that you used today will be available for people to view later.
Are they, Carolyn, if someone watches this video, will they be able to see the slides?
Yes, they will be.
Okay, so yeah. Here you go. And if you need a copy of my slides, you can get them from me if you want.
Yeah.
They're not so
if you're looking for that, you can send Sarah an email.
Yes, otherwise you'll have the video available.
Yes, and so this video will be available both on our Facebook channel, like our video section on our Facebook page, and also on our YouTube channel. So you'll be able to check the chat out whenever it's convenient to you.
And
Sarah,
I can see
oh, go ahead.
I can see that we have some people from clinics who are watching, and what I'm hoping they do take home is, particularly with respect to the transport and maintenance of embryos, that is talking to them. People think that's talking to the people who are donating embryos. That's not necessarily only speaking to those people. We're just speaking to any time you are a clinic who is being reimbursed for storage or maintenance transport of embryos, or a person who is involved in that. So you just have to be aware that it's not always as clear as it should be, the legislation, the way it's divided. So just be aware of that and take that into account when practicing.
Great, thank you for clarifying that. Another question that's come in. There was talk a few years ago about decriminalizing surrogacy. Where does that stand? What would change? And what would it mean?
Okay, great. So surrogacy itself is not illegal. So what I think the questioner is asking is about decriminalizing compensated surrogacy.
Yeah.
And decriminalizing compensated surrogacy kind of goes hand in hand with decriminalizing compensated gamete donation because they're all under the same act, criminalized together. There is actually still a push being made right now by Senator Monson, who is a female senator out of New Brunswick, who's, I think, taken a fabulous position and is working very hard as well to bring a bill in front of the Senate about decriminalizing compensated surrogacy and compensated gamete donation. I think it shows that Canada has much more of a taste these days, and is actually, I find a lot of Canadians are surprised when I tell them that it's illegal to pay a surrogate or buy sperm from someone, etc., or pay them for their time. What that would mean is we don't know what the end legislation would look like because different, what comes through at the end, we won't know what that looks like. But the general idea is that you would be allowed to actually pay somebody. So instead of having reimbursements only where you're only reimbursing someone for whatever they actually spent and it's completely criminal for them to make money off of the situation, they would be allowed to be compensated. So that could look like various options. It could look like how it does in Spain. It could look like how it does in the United States. There's lots of different places. There's lots of different models we can have, but I think the idea here would generally be that if we're going to regulate these things like surrogacy, egg donation, and sperm donation, they should be regulated as health issues. They shouldn't be regulated as criminal issues, and they should also be regulated as parentage issues, because that's what this is really about. It's health issues and parentage issues. It shouldn't be criminal. So that's what we'd be trying to do: get rid of the criminal activity and the criminal association with compensating surrogates and compensating gamete donors, so sperm and egg donors. No one's pushing, or as far as I know, no one's pushing for a decriminalization of embryo donors. That would still say altruistic.
Great. A follow-up question to that. Would it grossly inflate the cost of surrogacy and hurt prospective families that are already facing IVF or reimbursement costs?
So that's a great question. And my answer is going to be, I don't know. I think there will always be some people who are going to do this altruistically. So for example, in the state of California, where it's perfectly legitimate, perfectly legal to be involved in compensated surrogacy, there still are people who do it altruistically because they want to do it altruistically. So I think, will there be some people who do it compensated? For sure. Will those be an increase in that expense? Yes. I don't expect to see a huge increase in that expense because, I think my guess is that you're looking at something like $25,000, something like that, as which would be compensation. But I'm really, for a surrogate, I'm really pulling that out of nowhere. That's just what my guess would be. And it is possible there would be an increase for some, working with some surrogates who are compensated. And I think there will still always be people who choose to do it altruistically.
Great. Thank you for that, because I know that that's something we see sometimes, or we hear. People would be worried about that. So thank you.
And then it's important to note, though, also, sorry to interrupt, when it comes to gamete donation, so egg donation, there are places like Spain, for example, that have a fixed amount. So I'm going to throw out any number. This is just a random number, but say it's compensation of $6,000. That's every egg donor is compensated the exact same amount. So it has nothing to do with how tall she is, how pretty she is, how educated she is, how high her marks are. Everyone just gets the same amount. So there's lots of different models we could have that allow for compensation. It doesn't have to just be market, whatever the market calls for, but it could be. So there's getting rid of compensation doesn't necessarily answer the question. Getting rid of prohibition on compensation doesn't necessarily answer the question of what that numerical value will look like.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. I have another question that's come in. Is it possible, sorry, just let me read this, to use the same egg donor as surrogate.
Yes,
So the same 1 and 2. And is that,
yes.
I'd love for you to chat about that for a bit.
Yeah, so if you use the same person who's the egg donor is also your surrogate, that's a traditional surrogacy. So you can either do that just through an insemination process, which, believe it or not, in a place like Ontario, you could do an at-home insemination, and that's legitimate. You just want to take a lot of steps to make sure that you have a lot of protections there, because it is a little bit riskier business. But there is actually no law in the country that prohibits traditional surrogacy. And a lot of people think it is illegal. It's not illegal. And there's actually no law that differentiates in terms of who's a parent when it comes to traditional surrogacy and gestational surrogacy. And again, people seem to think that traditional surrogacy is illegal or you're not a parent. The only questions really about traditional surrogacy are two. One is it more likely for a traditional surrogate who's genetically related to the baby she's carrying on behalf of someone else to try to keep a baby? And I have to say, our evidence is not really conclusive on that, because we don't have surrogates in Canada trying to keep babies, traditional or gestational surrogates. So I can't necessarily say, oh, we have a slew of traditional surrogates trying to keep babies. It hasn't happened. And the second is, if a traditional surrogate tried to keep a baby, would she be more likely to be successful than would a gestational surrogate who doesn't have a genetic connection? And often that really wouldn't have much to do with the law. It would have to do with the judge's kind of emotional or visceral reaction to it. And again, we don't know, because we don't have surrogates trying to keep babies in Canada. We're very lucky. We've actually done a fabulous job within our, I think, like the surrogacy community has done a very fabulous job making sure that people have proper legal advice, proper medical advice, psychological counseling available to them, psychological support. And we've had surrogates who do not try to keep babies, and actually often are surrogates repeatedly because they've had such positive experiences. But
Right.
to make a long, that's a very long answer to yes, traditional surrogacy, either by insemination or IVF using her own eggs, is perfectly legal. Not many clinics will do it, but a few will.
Great. I have a question now about, sorry, it came into my mind and I should have written it down, but I was listening to your last comment, so it may come back to me. I thought it just popped into my head as you were speaking. So while I think of that, do you have anything else that you'd like to add? Anything that you'd like sort of to make sure people take home with them today?
So I guess my major take home, I kind of explained at the beginning, what I'm hoping people have is one, that this is doable. I don't want them to be scared off. I think you do have to take a little bit of time at the beginning. If you are handling the reimbursements yourselves, prepare yourself, make Excel spreadsheets, have actually the Health Canada provided sample documents that you're going to need if you're reimbursing for services or products, etc., or if you're reimbursing for net lost wages, a different document. Have all that available, be prepared, understand what you're doing. Talk to your lawyer. Your lawyer will go through this to you and explain how your reimbursements are going to work. And just, it's better to be prepared to do this and not kind of jump in, because suddenly you'll be very overwhelmed by the amount of documents that are needed. But remember, at the end of the day, this is not that bad. This is doable. It's a bit of a pain, but it's something you can manage. And I still want people to be fighting, being the wrong word, but encouraging people to be advocating on behalf of the changes that we still need in the legislation. So I don't think this is a final answer. I think actually Health Canada basically saying, we don't think this is a breach of Section 6 and Section 7 of the Act, but we can't put it in Section 12 because statutory interpretation doesn't allow us to do so, shows us just the holes in the legislation we have. And I think we all, not everybody, but I think there's a big push towards wanting to allow compensated surrogacy, egg donation, sperm donation, especially because so much of our egg and sperm we are getting from outside of Canada. We are getting something like 95% of our sperm where it's paid for anyways in the United States, and a very, very large percentage of our eggs are coming in from the United States too, through egg banks, where they're paid for anyways also. So at the end of the day, I think we still need to be pushing towards change, so I don't want people to rest on their laurels too much.
Wonderful. So if you are watching, whether you're watching with us live right now or watching the replay of this, if you're looking for legal advice or legal counsel to sort of help you move forward with this process, please don't hesitate to reach out to either Sara or Fertility Matters Canada. We'll be happy to help you get connected with a lawyer who specializes in fertility law in Canada so that you can feel more comfortable and confident making those decisions for you and your family building. So Sarah, I don't think we've got any other questions that have come in. Just let me do a quick check here on Facebook. Someone else just wondering about the PowerPoint presentation, if it will be available. This video will be made live on our Facebook page and on our YouTube channel, so you'll be able to check back for the video. And if you're really interested in a copy of this presentation, please connect with Sara at fertilitylawcanada.ca. Is that your email?
Sara at fertilitylawcanada.com.
.com, sorry.
No problem.
Great. So Sara, thank you so much for this presentation. I certainly learned a lot, and I try to keep up to date, but it's so much better when someone is explaining with visuals, so you can kind of wrap your head around these things. And again, like you said, this is really doable and not scary. We've got some comments coming in through our chat here. Thank you for the presentation. Very helpful, very informative. Thank you for sharing. So this is what we're here for. We're trying to help you have the information that you need to make these decisions for your reproductive health options. So on behalf of the board of directors and all of the volunteers at Fertility Matters Canada, thank you for tuning in, and please be sure to check our events page on Facebook and on fertilitymatters.ca, because we've got lots of extras lined up over the next weeks and months, and we can't wait to share all that information with you. Thanks, Sara.
Thank you.